Hello, welcome to another edition of Hindsight. I'm David Hines, and in this edition, I want to deal with another issue that relates to the proroguing of the parliament in Guyana, and that is the issue of dialogue. The president of Guyana has said that he prorogued the parliament because the opposition was disrupting the government program and he wanted to bring the opposition to the table for dialogue. Well, there's something wrong with that. Here is what the president is saying. He's saying, I am going to close down the highest forum of dialogue, the parliament. I am going to close down the highest forum of dialogue, the parliament, in order to get the members of that parliament to come to dialogue. Something is wrong with that reasoning. Something is very, very wrong with that reasoning. Everyone knows that the government of Guyana, the People's Progressive Party, the ruling party, they moved to prorogue the parliament because they wanted to avoid two things. They wanted to avoid a no confidence vote, which, if passed, would have meant going to election within 3 months. They also wanted to avoid dissolving the parliament because the president could have preempted the no confidence vote and dissolve the parliament and call early election. It seems to me, therefore, that the PPP wanted to avoid going to an early election. One could understand that. They wanted to avoid the embarrassment of their government being brought down by the opposition. And so they opted for the proroguing of the parliament. No, the president acted within his constitutional right. It is his constitutional right to prorogue the parliament. But one must say that when devices like those are within the Constitution, they're not devices to be used willy-nilly. Those devices are there, I would surmise, in case there is an emergency. That is, if the Parliament was standing in the way of some critical situation in the country, if the country was at the point of some kind of crisis that could not be averted by other means, then the president could have moved towards the action that it taken. One must reiterate here that the letter of the Constitution must be carried out within the spirit of the Constitution. If you act based on the letter of the Constitution outside of the spirit of democracy, then your action becomes undemocratic. What is constitutional is not always democratic. I want to stress that point. What is constitutional is not always democratic. And in this instance, where the minority, that is, where the executive is a minority executive in the sense that it does not enjoy a majority in the parliament, it makes it even more undemocratic because it is a minority government closing down a parliament in which it does not have a majority. Let me repeat that. A minority executive closing down a parliament where it is a minority. There is something highly undemocratic about that. So we want to get this very clear. The president has been saying for the last week that he wants the opposition to come to the table for dialogue. He's putting together a team to have dialogue for the opposition with the opposition. Now let me say this. Ever since 1997, the PPP has adopted the strategy of tying the opposition down in dialogue, holding these dialogues, and when decisions are being taken, not living up to the decisions, not implementing the decisions, not living up to the end of the bargain. They've done this repeatedly from 1997. They are guided by a mindset which was articulated by Cabinet Secretary Dr. Roger Luncheon a few years ago when he said, in any dialogue with the PNC and the PPP are not equals because the PPP is the government. This is the mindset that has informed dialogue whenever the PPP has been involved in them. For the PPP, dialogue is meant to bog the opposition down, to weaken the opposition in the face of its supporters. It's meant to mark time, and it's meant to give a facade of consultative democracy. Now, since the 2011 elections, some of us have argued very strenuously that the government calling of dialogues should not be adhered to by the opposition. That is, the opposition should not get into these meaningful dialogue with the government. But I have to say that the APNU in particular, since 2011, has not seen a dialogue that it didn't like. Every time the president say, come for a meeting, they jump and they went. And they've been doing that repeatedly for 3 years. It is heartening to hear them say now that those dialogues have been fruitless. They have not borne anything meaningful for the country. And so therefore, they're not at all excited about these dialogues. So, here is my position. There should be absolutely no dialogue with the PPP until the parliament is reconvened. There should be absolutely no dialogue with the PPP until parliament is reconvened. You don't need to have a dialogue to reconvene parliament. The PPP did not consult the opposition when it prorogued the parliament. And so therefore, the reopening of the parliament, the reconvening of the parliament should be unconditional. Now, once the parliament is reopened, then the opposition, that is the APNU and the AFC, should not enter into dialogue. Dialogue is not an effective tool of management. As I mentioned before, if you're entering into a dialogue where the government continues to call the shots and there are no results from the dialogue, then you're wasting time. What there should be, if there is any talks with the government, it should be negotiations, which are totally different from dialogue. That is, you need to negotiate a way forward, both in the short and medium term and the long term. One sense is that none of the three parties, but certainly the APNU and the PPP, want an early election. It's very clear. If the PPP wanted an early election, it could have dissolved the parliament. It doesn't want an early election. One sense is that the APNU also doesn't want an early election. The AFC may want an early election because it may see an opportunity to get a few more seats. But one has to go beyond what is good for the party and ask what is good for the country. Therefore, I would support negotiations over the no confidence vote. That is, if the government, if the PPP does not want a no confidence vote, then it must be able to negotiate something. And I would argue that the opposition should put on the table a government of national unity. That for the next 2 years of this term, if you do not want a no confidence vote, or you do not want to be voted out of government, then let's have a government of national unity for the next 2 years. And that government of national unity should reflect the representation in the parliament. Of course, the PPP would retain the presidency because they've won the presidency under the present rules. Now, having formed such a government, then the next 2 years should be negotiating a way forward. There should be local government elections in the next 2 years. That's a must. It has been put off now for 20 years. All the outstanding bills that the president has refused to sign, those should be signed. In particular, those bills that have to do with curbing corruption and having to do with independent local government elections. Then one should be able to talk about constitutional reform. It makes no sense to go back to an early election under the present rules. Under the present rules, the results are likely to be the same, where there would be a minority executive headed by the PPP and the joint opposition controlling the parliament. That would not be an advance on the present. And so, therefore, one needs to put constitutional reform on the table to ensure that you have an electoral system that can reflect the wishes of the people, an electoral system that is more democratic in nature. And so, therefore, negotiations are what is needed. It is not any kind of dialogue just for the sake of dialogue. So here, the ball is in the court of all of the parties. That is, if the PPP wants to play hardball, then it would want to go to election. The opposition would have no choice. But if they want to negotiate, I think the opposition should negotiate over the next 2 years, for the next 2 years. That is, negotiate for a government of national unity, and that government of national unity should oversee constitutional reform to bring about an electoral system that yields democratic results. That government of national unity should be able to pass outstanding bills that have been stalled by the PPP, and of course, to oversee local government election. So that's my position. No compromise on the reopening of Parliament, no dialogue on the reopening of Parliament. Not one single dialogue on the reopening of Parliament. The reopening of Parliament must be unconditional. And once Parliament is reopened, then you can go into negotiations, not dialogue, negotiations towards a political solution that must include constitutional reform and movement towards a mechanism that can bring into being a government that reflects the wishes of the people and that includes all of the representatives of the people, including the representatives of those who prefer the PPP as their party. So there we have it. No compromise, no dialogue until or around the proroguing of Parliament. There is no need for any dialogue for the reopening of Parliament. Until the next time, this is David Hinds, thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Hinds'Sight. You can see my other commentaries on my YouTube channel, Hinds'Sight, Hinds Sight, Hinds'Sight. That's my YouTube channel. You can catch my other videos there. And you can also catch my commentary, written commentary, on Guyana-Caribbean That's my website, www.Guyana-Caribbean One word, you'll catch my commentaries there. And of course, you can keep tuning in weekly, sometimes twice weekly, to this commentary, Hinds'Sight. Again, thank you for watching.